This week's intro is just going to be a little bit different than I've done previous intros. So if you've been listening to the podcast, I'm just going to try to switch things up. And the reason for that is when I've been like doing these intros and like when I've been writing this stuff on, Spotify, where the fuck this is published, like introing these guests and all that, like it feels like I'm trying to like sell shit. Like I'm trying to like go through all these things that we talked about and like, explain why you should listen to this. And I don't know, just part of it just feels fake. And I kind of realized that like, I don't like doing that. Like it just doesn't feel like something I normally do. And the reason I did in the first place was because, these other podcasters that I like and, probably try to emulate in some way, like these are the things that they did. So I'm like, well, if I want to, be successful and, do the things that they did and like grow it, like I need to do the same shit. But like I kind of just lost myself and how I would normally act along the way. So it occurred to me, like I don't have to fucking do that. I can just change. So I'm going to do that with this episode. And so the beginning of this is just going to be kind of a rant on telling people that like if there's something in your life that you want to change, like just fucking change it. And just like try something new. And if it doesn't work, you could always go back to the old thing. But there's literally zero harm in your life to not trying. And you don't also owe anybody a fucking explanation. Like I assume that anybody that's listening to this has to partly listen to this because, of me in some way, at least if you've come back to this shit. This is your first time. I'm so sorry. But I'm not. That this is going to be the first thing that you hear. But, a lot of the guests that I have and that other podcasters have are also on a bunch of other podcasts. So there's a reason that you listen to it here. I want to give you guys my truly authentic expression in everything that I do. And I want to just do this like from the heart in one take. And that's how I want you guys to live too. I want everybody to be able to just express themselves freely and authentically and try new shit. And if it doesn't work, try something else. And so all of that being said, I will still talk about the guest that I had on this episode because it was sick, but I'm not going to talk about it in a way that's trying to like sell you on why you should listen. You've already come this far. So, I assume maybe you're going to stay for a little bit longer, but my episode, my guest, Jahan, is just stupid fucking smart when it comes to anything psychedelics. He wrote a whole book on psilocybin, and he's been basically like studying psychedelics for the last 20 years of his life since he was 18 years old. And this man just has so much knowledge and so much wisdom and so many fucking answers to a bunch of really cool questions that I'm excited that I got to ask during this episode. So if you're at all curious about how psychedelics work, why they exist, why us humans exist, why we even give a shit, like what is human consciousness, all that cool stuff, this is definitely an episode that you're going to enjoy a lot. So thank you for indulging me while I go on this rant, and I hope you enjoy this episode.
Yeah.
How did you get interested in the psychedelic space?
It's sort of young. Even at 15, there was this deep curiosity and interest that I could take some kind of chemical compound and it shifted my perception of reality. It got me really existentially questioning, like, how do we even know what reality is? And so I think there was always a philosophical, existential, like, inclination. And these are like the best tools I've seen for that level of exploration. At 18, I had a life-changing psilocybin experience. I was an atheist, depressed, suicidal, and taking some mushrooms to see my favorite band Tool play. I had this transcendental kind of communion, ego-death experience with God that kind of shook my worldview and being dramatically. And that really kind of taught me that these things are real and powerful and transformative. That's 20 years ago. And they've been a part of my life since. I was always learning more about them, the history, continue. I've had hundreds of journeys myself. And maybe 7 or 8 years ago, I decided to go all in. I was like, this is what I want to do with my life.
Yeah. Before that 7 or 8 years when you started to go all in, what were you doing at that point?
Yeah, a great question. I was still being led by the psychedelics. And so I came in as a neuroscience major, switched to physics and math for 3 years. And then the psilocybin experience said to leave physics and math. It won't give you what you're looking for. Focus on mysticism. And I was like, that's not even a major. But I majored in philosophy, right? Minored in math, psychology, physics, and then came to the Bay Area to get my master's in consciousness, then the doctorate in consciousness, transformative consciousness, philosophy, and cosmology. This whole time I was just focused on self-exploration and growth, doing a lot of different therapy, yoga, workshops. And then I went into some major trainings after that. I did Hakomi, 2-year somatic psychotherapy training. I assisted for 2 years at the psychedelic certificate training at CIS. I trained for 3 to 4 years within the Mazatec mushroom tradition. Now I've been a part of or helped 6 different psychedelic guide trainings. So even before those 7 years, I was kind of really focused on consciousness. And there is no better method for expansion, transformation, and healing I've seen other than those that use psychedelics.
Yeah. There's this quote that's on your website that I love, and I want to ask why you chose this quote, but it's by Carl Jung. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate.
I fucking love that quote. Definitely I want us to sit with that and we take it in. We have so much patternings that we are born into, whether they're collective societal patternings, evolutionary patternings, and even more the personal ones. Like what I see, there's a lot of intergenerational trauma. Now we carry on the trauma of our parents, but it's probably been there for generations, and we act it out, and we have these deep emotional and intellectual patterns. And it's like as if there's these background programs and scripts and codes just running the whole time that really shape our perception of the world and our belief systems, and even more our identity of who we think we are. And that's when we break free of these conditionings, what I think psychedelics really help us do. We're actually not even aware of how we're not that free. We're just going within these boundaries and guidelines, and these medicines tend to be so boundary dissolving. So they break away the conditioning. They also break away some of the boundaries between us and the unconscious, whether it's a personal or collective unconscious, right? So we can see what's these currents underneath that's been there in depth psychology, Freudian psychology, and even more like archetypal stuff. And we're able to work with them more consciously.
Gotcha. So like, what does essentially, I guess, making the unconscious conscious, like, what is that experience? How do you describe that to somebody who's maybe never had that experience before?
Yeah. At first, I would maybe see or ask them to come in a little bit of a humbleness that there's so much we don't understand, like all of us, so have them open that there's things underneath their awareness that they may not be seeing. Freud, for example, at the beginning of Western psychology, kind of put forward the metaphor of a psyche as kind of like an iceberg. You kind of would just see the tip of it, but most of the psyche is underground and underneath our regular perception. If they're not having looked directly into psychology and see all these like a deeper structural frameworks that we all participate, I'd have them check into their emotions. 70% of people I've worked with that come in for psychedelics are dealing with depression, and a lot of them been depressed for 10, 20 years, and they are not sure why they're depressed. They've tried all the medication, the SSRIs, they've tried a lot of different therapies, and they're not sure. And these psychedelics help them see what's in these somatic patternings and what's underneath these emotional roots, kind of frees them, just to have that level of perception. In terms of another way to say the very same thing is the neuroscience looking at psilocybin. Psilocybin dissolves what's called the default mode network in the brain that neuroscientists have called the ego part of the self. It's a network that lights up every time you think about you. And that system begins to dissolve with the use of psilocybin. And when that system dissolves, it actually creates a hyper-connected brain state, because it turns out the ego, as we may call it, acts as a repressive function for the rest of our psyche, of our unconscious. With the ego transparent out of the way, the whole brain begins to communicate. And we see this experiential when people take psilocybin, that they have this plethora, this huge emergence of archetypal imagery, of deeper feelings and sensations, of even more awareness, and even more a deeper sense of themselves, as if a part of themselves had been in the background, but finally comes up to the forefront.
Yeah. So I guess what is the point of the ego? Like, why does the default mode network need to be there? Why does it have to be so, I guess, kind of strict?
I think the universe, if I may kind of come from that standpoint, is here to birth selves, individual selves. And I remember in one journey kind of being told, as much as we can say that in psychedelic space, that individuality is key. So what individuality does is bringing our differences, our creativity, our unique viewpoints, our kind of art, a unique sense of self to this world. And so the ego is part of that. So the ego is also can be seen as a self-image, as Bill Hicks, the comedian, really points out, a young man on acid realized today that all matter is merely energy condensed to a slower vibration, that we're all one consciousness exploring itself subjectively. There is no such thing as death. Life is but a dream, and we are the imagination of ourselves. Here's Tom with the weather. Kind of pointing out that we are this image, this ego we're creating, that way we see ourselves and the way we want to be seen is an illusionary construction, but we're part of this very large dream and we're creating this sense of self. So it's not bad. Where the ego gets in trouble is when it starts to feel really separated from everything else, right? So the ego is not bad. We're here to grow egos, and it's awesome. We're like avatars or characters within a large video game that we want to be in. But when the ego begins to see itself from the rest of the environment, the ecosystem, the rest of society, that leads to a lot of trouble, both for the individual and the rest of society. So what we want to do is learn to live in harmony with the rest of the system. And again, that's where the boundary dissolving experience, because if nobody's ever had their boundary dissolved, they're bought into their story of what the world is in themselves. And this, for a moment, wipes the slate clean, gives space for new information to arise that can be integrated. And then that sense of self expands to just beyond us, to maybe feel like we're one with the planets or the rest of the universe.
I find it so interesting, at least for me, like in my personal experience, like as I've continued to use psychedelics, my sense of self has gotten like to a more in like an individualistic sort of way. Like I'm much more confident in who I am as a person. It's happened to be not all of these things that I thought it was, but yet like I'm so much more confident that, and yet like also at the same time, my sense of connectedness with the world has also expanded. So like it has both increased my sense of individualism and increased my sense of wholeness at the same time, which almost seems kind of counterproductive.
No, you said well, I think that is a development. Our sense of self expands and the way we see the world expands, and both have more depth. Just to bring in the work of like Abraham Maslow, the transpersonal psychologist and humanist theories, he has that famous hierarchy of needs. At the bottom is safety, security, love and connection, self-esteem, and all those are necessary to get to the jump of what he calls self-actualization and transcendence. And so really pointing that we actually need enough self-esteem, or you could say confidence and security, to really crystallize and become who we really are. So that they go together. Once the world becomes bigger, you can become bigger. If you live in a small world, you have a small identity. So the world also wants you to be strong and confident and feel powerful, so you can be of service, to be productive while you're here.
Yeah. How does that being of service, I guess, play into your sense of self, and why is that important?
Great question. I think at some point you'll begin to realize, whether it's meditation, yoga, tantra, psychedelics, that we are all one being. As cliche as that sounds, that we're all one, but that's a deep truth, that we're cells within a larger body. And so from this perspective, everybody is you. In some very core way, you are the world. And so the deepest meaning comes from being of service, from showing an embodiment of love. And then giving it. I think when we die, that's what's going to matter. It's like, how did we love while we're here? And did we give our gift? And even Maslow, who I'm bringing back, he has a self-actualization. And before he died for 10 years, he worked on a new stage called transcendence. And transcendence was just focused on purpose and being of service. Once you realize you're a part of everything else, that's how kind of you want to spend your time. That's what lights you up and gives your day meaning, is, helping people as much as you can while you're here.
Yeah. Something that you mentioned like way earlier was during your first like life-changing psilocybin experience when you were 18 years old, is like you said you were an atheist before that, and then you kind of had this sense of God. How do you explain now what would like your spiritual / religious belief system be?
Yeah, I think it's expanded enough to hold all the religions and evolution. And, I think part of our work is to integrate as much data as possible about who we are in the world. And so it feels as comprehensive as I made it out to be. definitely more focused on direct experience, like psychedelics or meditations or tantra, things that get you to those expanded states, than belief systems. But there are some, I say beliefs, but I think there's a structure to our universe, just like there's in physics. You know, we have your gravity, space, time, and even all those are somewhat changing in this kind of evolving structure. But I think, you know, a deep sense of interconnectedness, of a sense of unity, of oneness, of ultimately timelessness and eternal, and they'll fit very together. They're just different ways of looking at the same thing. Interconnectedness also means that there's a unity, you know, and that we're both internally and externally connected. Like we're a part of a large ecosystem on the planet, in the solar system, the universe, but our consciousnesses are also very entangled, you know. And so in this way, our thoughts matter, our feelings matter, our entire depth matters. So that's a little bit more, you can say, my perspective, but it also includes evolution, where also nature talks to us directly, like through these chemical compounds.
Yeah. Let's dive into that part right there, is the evolutionary aspect. So why do psychedelics even exist in the first place? Like, how did that come to be?
Yeah, it's a big question. Same thing. I was since 15, just focused on that. And, you know, my dissertation was on this topic, on human evolution and psilocybin mushrooms. And there's an entire chapter dedicated to that, the book, The Psilocybin Connection. We do have to zoom out and see it within an evolutionary context. So if we look at psilocybin, for example, it's about 70 million years old, right? And then we have to look at fungi itself, you know, because the mushroom itself is part of a large body called mycelium. Mycelium's about 2.5 billion years old. Animals are about 500 million. So fungi has been here about 5 times longer than animals. And mycelium set the soil for plants to evolve onto land. It's this large underground living network that connects all the root systems. Our entire evolutionary process, we've been on top of it, on top of this living, intelligent web that breaks down matter, sends nutrients to all the plants, sends chemical compounds to communicate between all of them. It's like nature's internet, using a good metaphor. And so out of this living system that's been taking our information, our entire history, comes, you could say, the cap and stem mushroom formation of psilocybin that fits into the 5-HT2A serotonin receptor in our brain better than serotonin itself, with no biotoxicity, creates a hyper-connected brain state. And that we know through, you know, decades of studies, creates a mystical experience in 65% of people, helps with addiction, helps with different kind of cognitive disorders. I would say it helps with creativity, empathy, artistic abilities. And so the idea is that this chemical compound really catalyzed the evolution of humanity itself, an idea first put forward by Terence and Dennis McKenna. And so why are there all these chemical compounds? Like there's, I think, 2,000 DMT plants throughout the planet. There's over 200 different species of psilocybin mushrooms. And it's the chemical way that nature finds balance and moves towards homeostasis. The same way if we look at your body, there's all these chemical messagings happening all the time to regulate your body. And it's quite complex. I think it's like 37 trillion cells in your body, all chemically and electrically communicating, right? So that same thing's happening to an ecosystem. And psychedelics is the way they kind of talk. And another key insight that helped me really kind of wrap all this together.
Is it just psychedelics, or is it like the mushroom network of the non-psychedelic mushrooms as well, like through the entire mycelium?
No, well said. Yeah, I mean, all the plants are connected through the mushroom network underground. Okay. So 90% of plants have a symbiotic relationship to mycelium. 80% of them would stop existing if mycelium went out. So they are dependent on the mushroom structure that's underneath there, right? And they talk, it's just like, that's the cables through which everything else talks, you know? So
gotcha.
That's definitely, yeah, one way to see that part right there.
It's almost kind of like the internet, but it's basically just mushrooms, totally. And it's how the plants are able to communicate.
Yeah. So this is the work by Richard Doyle. He was a Pennsylvania State professor, and he wrote this book called Darwin's Pharmacy: Sex, Drugs, and Evolution of the Noosphere. And he read thousands of trip reports for his research. And he says that the main psychedelic insight is that the participant realizes they're part of a vast interconnected living system, and they should be retermed ecodelics. You know, so after scanning thousands of these, what he came to see is they give us ecological awareness, that we're systems as part of a larger system. And so then again, it's like, why would nature grow compounds that make us ecologically aware? Because it's a way to regulate itself. It's a way to regulate consciousness within that system. And so I'd argue strongly that our species has actually been out of balance because we've stopped using psychedelics, most of us for millennia. There are definitely tribes that have continued, that live in greater harmony, But industrial cultures, going back mostly for the agricultural revolution for a lot of us, and I could show you why that kind of probably happened. But we've been out of contact with ourselves and the planet because we haven't been using psychedelics that grow everywhere in almost every environment on the planet.
Yeah. Was there ever a time that I guess can be argued in human existence in which the majority of humans were actually using psychedelics in ceremonial settings or for spiritual practices, whatever that is?
Yeah, there's a lot of archaeological evidence that would support that. And there's a lot of reasoning that would also make that be the case. The idea that the first humans, we were primates, our ancestors, for about 50 million years in the forests of Africa. Weather patterns changed, took the trees away, forcing us down to the ground. We became bipedal. And for about 4 to 5 million years, we probably used psilocybin mushrooms while we were in the African savannas. There's, I think, 17 different primates that eat mushrooms. And there's archaeological evidence of cave paintings in the area depicting like shamanic mushroom use. So the idea is that we did that for 4.5 million years, sometimes in ritual, sometimes like microdoses we find it. And it stimulates neurogenesis, the growth of new neurons. The brain physically begins to grow. As we kept migrating, we see archaeological evidence going back thousands of years, all through Asia, Europe, and then definitely throughout the Americas, of cave paintings depicting mushroom use. So way prehistoric, that's there. Once we start moving to like the first written languages, it keeps popping up. So the Rig Vedas are about 5,000 years old, and they're the first religious scriptures. And there's about 200 hymns talking about soma, a plant or fungi that connects one to gods. You know, there's been a lot of good research in the last few years and going back some decades of the Eleusinian mysteries in Greece, that they had for 1,000 years this ritual where they drank kykeon, a brew that likely contained ergot, from which we derive LSD, where all the citizens of Greece were asked to participate once in their lives. So we're talking about, Pythagoras, Plato, Aristotle, Socrates, all the big names that really formed our Western tradition were using psychedelics. And then we see all throughout the Americas, so North, Central, and South America, before the Europeans came, for millennia, high level of psychedelic use. So the Mayans left over 200 different psilocybin mushroom stones. The Aztecs were seen and depicted when the Europeans came of high level mushroom use, even during political rituals. So we had two continents here that we've kind of taken away their practices. Some of the remnants are still left, but yes. I mean, I'd say 500 years ago, it could have been as much as 2 entire continents were largely using psychedelics, but their history, their language, and all the rituals were kind of taken away. And yes, there's still some remnants left with peyote, ayahuasca, San Pedro, and thanks to the Mazatec's, psilocybin's also come really to the forefront.
Gotcha. So, in short, yes, would be the answer to that question.
yeah, for sure.
It's so interesting. Like now it very much seems that obviously psychedelics are now coming into the mainstream, media attention and just people being willing to talk about it more. Why do you think it's taken this long for this to start up again, given the fact that there have been groups that have been using it underground in secret this whole time?
It's the paradigm that influenced largely by the European cultures that came. They came first and most with this mindset of superiority, whether it be because they had higher levels of technology or because they came with this religious belief, like in Christianity, that they have the one and only truth. And so as soon as they encountered other civilizations that were using the plants in the environment this way, they largely eradicated them. They saw it as demonic. I mean, this is their words. They've written it down. And when they came to the Americas, for example, it's the largest ethnocide in human history. About 60 million people died. Right, it's 90% of the population, North, Central, and South America, died either from intentional or from exposure to diseases that were brought over. So that's to say, a lot of the Western world, the European world, wasn't receptive. And I'm saying European because they've influenced the rest of the world dramatically in economics and technology and in paradigm. So aside from not being receptive, the truth is, I don't think there's anything as powerful as psychedelics. And I don't say that lightly just because it's my interest. This comes from like 20 years of trying to study and learn as much as I can, where a compound within 6 hours can radically transform your life. And that is quite a threat to the establishment of society. It's a threat to economic and power systems. It's a threat to the military. People that were using psychedelics in the 60s were going against the Vietnam War. you know, so of course the government came and shut it down. So another good line is from Michael Pollan's book, How to Change Your Mind, the bestseller that came out in 2018. He says, in what other point in human history did the youth have such a searing rite of passage that the prior generation didn't understand, right? So with that huge expansion of consciousness during the 60s, the adults got scared, completely shut it down. And so it is a threat to religion. It's a threat to the political system and so on. That being said, it's also the most transformative things I've seen that helps us get on balance. So it's more than anything else right now. Psychedelics gives me hope for our future world and the future evolution of humanity.
That's a really beautiful way of putting it. I think I very much agree with you on that, just given the fact that I think something that I struggle with a lot is like with my own psychedelic use is just about every single time that I'm using them, LSD specifically for whatever reason, because for me, that's like a very like external experience, not as much internal, but like, you know, I think about people around me, I think about the world, and then I'm like, if everybody were on this, there's no way that these current systems that we have in place can survive. It doesn't make sense. Like you try to think of these things and it's like this, I don't understand how this is in place right now. But obviously because so many people are basically just conditioned at such an early age to believe in the system, because why would we believe anything else at that point? So we just don't question it. Once I took that for the first time, that was the first time that I really just naturally questioned it. It wasn't because that was my intention or anything like that, but you just think about it and you think, you know, why would we have some of these people over here that are in these economic conditions, whereas we have these people in these economic conditions, when it seems like there's a way for us to solve this problem here?
Totally. You know, one ways that we can see humanity's estrangement from the psychedelics that grow everywhere is to see it kind of mythologically as like the fall from Eden, that we were in this kind of paradise that connected us to the oneness and the deep kind of intelligence of nature for a long time. We've fallen away. We can get to the details of why, and then we've created this kind of very different kind of society. And we're coming to this breaking point where if we're kind of holding that there's probably a deeper intelligence, whether it's universal, planetary, underneath it, there's a reason psychedelics are coming in now, you know. So another nice coincidental fact is the same year LSD was invented was the same year the atomic bomb was invented, right? So we coming to this point that we might really harm life on this planet in a way that can't be taken back, and really maybe put our species at threat. And it's a very turbulent century, you know, since the atomic bomb. And so, you know, it's within then, after a few thousand years of being estranged, that we're also hitting this ecological crisis that I think we're learning about these compounds that bring ecological awareness. So I think they're coming in right on time. You know, it's sad that we haven't had them around, but that also means there's so much to look forward to moving forward into the future.
Yeah. Do you think it's something that needs to be done sort of slowly over time as well? Or do you think that, you know, if everybody, let's just say tomorrow, were to be like, fuck it, I'm taking mushrooms, do you think that would solve anything? Or do you think things would get pretty bad pretty quick?
Yeah, you know, I took some amazing courses from Christopher Bache. He's a great teacher. He was teaching in person at CIS, and he wrote Dark Night, Early Dawn, and LSD in the Mind of the Universe. And he did high-level LSD experiences for about 20 years while kind of looking at it very philosophically. And he came out with a line of like, you can have too much God too fast. So rushing to learn to grow without, you know, holding yourself or everything around you in a compassionate way can be painful. And so I don't think it's ever going to be realistic that even if we made psilocybin completely legal tomorrow, that everybody's going to go out and take psilocybin without doing research. I think people take care of themselves somewhat apart, and people are scared and they do their research. And the truth is we need safe containers. That's going to be the most foundational part of this is cultivating more sense of safety while using psychedelics. And so I think it's happening much faster than any of us realized. It's quite an accelerating growth. You know, 5 years ago, we were nowhere near the state of integrating psychedelics. 2 years ago, a lot's happened, and now it's every day. You know, there's a few years, there was only 1 or 2 psychedelic trainings, and now I hear a new one every week. Projected legalization for psilocybins probably 2 years from now, MDMA probably this year. You know, I know there's centers that are just starting to be put up that are just preparing for legalization. So It's going to happen fast. And the science at the end of the day speaks louder than anything, that there isn't other method of healing and transformation that's as effective. We're talking 80% success over treatment resistant depression. People that have depression for a long period of time, they've tried all the other SSRIs, that have tried a lot of different forms of therapy, and they're still depressed and suicidal. This is effective for them. And it's even more effective people that aren't that far down. So it's going to happen. I think within 5, 7, 8 years, there's going to be psychedelic clinics in probably every city, every kind of large level city.
That's my dream, man. I just want to, like, as people who are open about talking about this already, I know there's, 10 more people that have had these experiences but still don't feel comfortable talking about them. Yeah. And then there's 100 more people on top of that, or 1,000 more people on top of that have simply just never had this experience. And like, it's so hard not to want to shout from a rooftop, like, there's a fucking answer, when, you know that there are these things that can help, but also too, like, it's, it's not our job to help everybody. Like, people have to reach a point of wanting to help themselves.
Yeah. I mean, I resonate with what you just shared. After I had that experience at 18, I remember just feeling it so strong in my body of like wanting to shout from the rooftops. I'm like, this is game changing on every fucking level, whether it's spiritual, cognitive, emotional, like, it is huge. And the truth is, if I went and started shouting that, this is 2002, I would have just created confusion and harm for myself, because it was in nobody else's mind. I would have been more estranged. I would have just been seen as crazy. The science wasn't out to the way it is now. And so patience is a huge part of it, just waiting for everybody else to catch up. And you can say it's slow in the sense of people have to have these direct experiences or learn the science for them to get on board, but it's spreading like wildfire. Like Michael Pollan's came out book, and it was like a bestseller. It's been amazing. Like a nice little string of events for me personally was my book was just recommended in the New York Times a couple weeks ago. On his book, and then my book were put forward to look and learn deeper into psilocybin. Right.
That's
so we
awesome,
have major
man.
newspapers, new outlets. It's pretty much like a topic of conversation in most places I go. It's in the medical field and psychiatric field. It's in the legal field. It's in the political field, and it's in the business field. It's a hot topic. The Economicists, it's a major magazine platform that releases a lot of videos on economic trends throughout, the world. I remember seeing in December, so just this last month, the top 5 trends to look forward to in 2023. Psychedelics was number 2. Right. So it's really turning the conversation in every way, like 360 degrees.
Yeah. Diving back into psilocybin, and actually, I guess kind of beyond that, what are the key differences between psilocybin, which is obviously found in magic mushrooms, versus the DMT that's found in ayahuasca and San Pedro, and the mescaline that's found in the peyote? Like, are there true differences in the way that those actually act on the brain? Are there positives or negatives to each one? Because I know those are all considered the classical psychedelics, correct?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I think the distinctions, are fun to see, and we like to categorize things and kind of see the nuances. That being said, the vast majority of the experience, I think, is very similar. I'd say almost across the board. And a big reason for that is we're dealing with the same psyche. It's like we're dealing with the same structure of consciousness. We're just exploring it differently and slightly changing its shape. And even if we look at the chemistry itself, there's 2 large family of psychedelics. Now there's more, but there's the phenethylamines and the tryptamines. And whether it's LSD, DMT, psilocybin, 5-MeO-DMT, they're all considered tryptamines. And they all build off, you could say, tryptophan or a serotonin structure. And even within that, all the psychedelics grow off of the structure of DMT. So psilocybin has DMT in it. It just has more atoms added onto it. It's just a more complex form of DMT. Right. And whether we're seeing, mescaline and then MDMA, they're phenethylamines, they're also kind of very similar. What I've seen across the board of psychedelics, and I'd also add this with meditation, tantra, any kind of consciousness expanding practices, is people come to the same truths, right? Like, we're all interconnected. We're all one. There's unity. Love's the most important thing. Learning's up there. Be a better human. And so whatever psychedelic we use, there's different flavors to touch and experience this unity to come to the same conclusions. So we like novelty. So it's nice to try them all, but the results ultimately, if you stay with any of them long enough, are going to be somewhat similar, as far as I can tell.
Yeah, I like how you mentioned that, like, it's to all come to the same conclusion. Somebody asked me this a couple weeks ago. They're like, do you think that you could have come to the conclusions that you did, or basically like had such a radical change without the use of psychedelics? And I said, yes, 100%, but it would have taken me so much fucking longer. Because I didn't know what to do. Like, when you're stuck, you're stuck. You don't need something. And like, having something that just jolts your system like that is just so powerful. And there's so much to be said for that. So unless you're taught at a young age, the point of meditation and like the point of Tantra and the point of these other practices, you're not going to do them. You don't understand why you're doing them. And something that's interesting too is, like, I'm not a religious person, but I think probably similar to you, I believe in God for sure, 100%. But like, there's no specific religion that I follow anymore. But like, the point of the rituals that happen in a religious setting, the point of prayer is the same as a lot of these other practices that you'll see in like yoga or in meditation. Like, it's just being grateful, being still, and allowing yourself to do that. But it's just not explained in the same way. It's so much harder to actually understand, because you're told that there's a right way to do it.
100%. You know, I've seen that myself as somebody that's liked to really venture any kind of a method of transformation or engaging in consciousness. I've gone through different periods of deep meditation, and one that stands out right now, there's a time where I was taking meditation courses, but then coming home, practicing for an hour, and then 2 hours and 3 hours a day, and really kind of going in deep. And about after 100 days of this, there came that kind of threshold of like, oh my God, the whole ego death. I'm about to die. This is scary. Staying with that for 15 minutes, dissolving, and then blasting out, expanding, like every cell's vibrating with love. There's just this eternal moment, feeling like God's presence, like complete fulfillment, like beaming. You're like, and the first thought that arose was, I've experienced this on psilocybin. But this just took me hundreds of hours to get to, right? And there's amazing parts with practices and meditation. It's like, there's like daily maintenance and mindfulness. It has its awesome things. But the state experience that is ultimately so meaningful, that we derive so much from, because now we have this new point of reference in life, there's much faster, effective ways to get there. And I think if we get there for psychedelics, I think it's similar to what you're saying. It kind of encourages you or inspires you to go try other ways to get there also, that you can kind of tap into more in a daily way.
Yeah. For me, my experiences of using mainly like LSD and psilocybin for, let's call it, the last like 5 years, and none of it was really in like a ritualistic way, or like a ceremonial setting. It was all pretty recreationally, but I also knew at the same time that like there were changes that were happening and positive changes that I could do. And like, I just knew intuitively that this was a tool that I can use to enact positive change. And this is before I had done any of the research to actually confirm any of that. But I had tried meditation in the past, was the thing. And I was never able to like connect to it. I was always still just so in my mind thinking like, am I doing this right? Like, what is the point of this? And like, I tried it like every day for like 6 months, like at one point in my life. Like, this is at the, towards the beginning of the pandemic, actually. And I still didn't get it. And it wasn't until I went to Peru and I sat with ayahuasca, and that experience was just so different than my other experience with psychedelics. And they didn't even really talk about meditation or anything like that. But when I came back from that, I immediately understood. Like, I immediately wanted to do it again. And I got it. Like, something just clicked, and I wasn't even trying to.
No, I think well said. You know, I've definitely had many experience throughout the years where, while on psychedelics, they kind of point me and they're like, start meditating, and I think people don't see just how helpful they can be in such a variety of ways. Like, when I take psychedelics, they're like, you get a lot of the same messages, like eat healthy, exercise, sleep well, meditate, like the whole point is to have a good life. And I think meditation is one of those practices we can bring in more on a daily, so yeah, definitely. I think there you go. There's another good book called Zigzag Zen. Came over 20 years ago with Alan Badinger and Alex Gray, and it just was re-released, and it really broke down during the 60s and 70s that so many people that became spiritual teachers and helped bring meditation to the West were first inspired by psychedelics. It was their tastes into the States that led them to go find other practices and philosophies from around the world and then bring it back, and ultimately helped spiritualize America in a whole new way.
Yeah. Speaking about like the kind of the meditation aspect, something that just kind of like popped into my mind too. I think like one of the reasons why for me it just didn't click originally, and I think for a lot of people that might be feeling lost and maybe have tried it before and like it hasn't worked or something, probably go through something similar, is it still feels like it's something that like you do. And to me now, the whole point of meditation is the opposite of doing. It's literally just giving myself space to be. And when you're coming at it from a point of, oh, I need to go meditate, I should go meditate, like I'm going to go do this thing, you're already kind of coming at it from like the incorrect angle. So it's going to be so difficult. Whereas like, I think we just have so much trouble being. I think that's a big problem in society, at least that I see, is people have a lot of trouble simply just sitting still and just allowing whatever feelings are there to come up. And meditation gives you that space to do it. And so looking at that way, like it's just being like, I don't have to go, you know, put on a 10-minute thing from a Calm app to tell me to go meditate. If I'm sitting there and I've got 5 minutes between meetings, just allowing myself to literally just sit there for 5 minutes between meetings, like that's a form of meditation.
I think, yeah, well said. And it is so much counterintuitive to like a lot of the values in our society. You know, something I see, especially in the US, probably more than anywhere else, but through so much of the industrial world, is our focus is on productivity, that our value comes from doing. And so for a lot of us, and I had to struggle with this a lot in my life too, that if I wasn't doing something, sometimes people feel shame, they feel not enough. And Abraham Maslow saw this in his work too. So in the first several stages around like love and connection and self-esteem, while we're working on these levels, we feel deficient. There are deficiency memes or stages. And when we finally take this jump to self-actualization, he calls it being memes. Like now we can just be, right? There's no need to keep proving ourselves. So it takes a while to get there. One way is to keep being and work through those structures. And as we were saying a moment ago, I think there's a certain amount of self-esteem needed, you know, where you can just be. Otherwise, what I've seen for a lot of people, they start to feel a lot of self-judgment. And that kind of motivates them to do things.
Yeah. Getting out of that state of, and again, that can be useful as well, because, you know, it's highly motivational to want to go do things, but you know, there comes a point where eventually it's going to catch up to you. Do you think that that's something that happens to everybody at some point in their life, that like, if they don't handle all of the, you know, the dogmatic programming that they've had that they intuitively know is bad, but don't do anything about, that they're going to reach that point in their life where they're like, oh, fuck, or can people really go through their whole lives and, you know, maybe not get it until the last, you know, minute when they're actually dying and they have that spiritual experience, which I know happens.
Yeah. You know, yeah, totally. I think there's a lot of people, it's hard to say, maybe most, like never get it while they're alive. And so I think there's a large parts of our society that they'll work their entire lives just trying to prove themselves, you know, so we can call that more like the ego kind of function, to just look good for themselves and to others. And so they might go into finance and make a shitload of money and be a billionaire and still not fucking happy, or work really fucking hard and there's still their deep pain inside and they're not enough. It's not a given. I think they'd have to get to a point where they realize this isn't working. Like, I'm still in a prison. I've hit all this external freedom. I'm financially free, and I'm still in this inside prison, and things aren't working, and I'm breaking down. No, that, or they're proactive, right? Somehow they were lucky karmically, and they got into self-development really young without having to go through a lot of pain, maybe through their parents. It's not a given. It's not a given, but it's a more of a possibility once they have a certain level of self-esteem.
I saw this video on TikTok, so I obviously take everything with a grain of salt. But like, it was somebody who's a well-known public speaker. I forget who, but like basically saying that people with the most suffering early on in their life end up living sort of the greatest lives with, you know, transformational change, or, you know, basically kind of figuring out how to be peaceful and how to actually live a fulfilled life. Would you agree with that? Or do you think that it really just does depend?
It's been my experience so far that really kind of resonates with that. I know I've said it many times that I feel everything I feel I've accomplished internally and externally in this life is definitely related to a lot of the pain I had. You know, it kind of pushes you to grow. It either you make it or you break down and want to kill yourself and die. So I had a journey a few years ago where the felt sense that I put 2/3 of my soul, my being, whatever, put 2/3 of the pain I would experience in this lifetime within the first third of my life. And so pain, if digested, can be like rocket fuel for growth. You know, a huge motivation to go do things and keep expanding and learning, partly to get out of the pain. It's to change who you are and your environment to finally feel good. And after a while, learning and growing just feels good. You know, so the more I've sat with the people that seem are really well put together and deeply authentic and a lot of integrity and have done so much internal and external, a lot of them were people that had dealt with a lot of pain. You know, I wish this wasn't just the case. You know, I'm sure there's other examples, but as far as I can tell, I've seen a huge correlation between deep pain, processing it, and then kind of wisdom, like embodied wisdom.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that as well. And it is unfortunate. And it's just so, like, there's no rhyme or reason for it. Like, I hope as we continue to develop and as we continue to use more psychedelics as a society, I hope that that's not something that needs to continue to be the case, just because I think once you have, you know, more authentic people that are walking around as their true selves already, the hope is once they start having kids, they can just start teaching their kids these things at a young age. So there doesn't necessarily need to be all of that pain.
Yeah, definitely. I would definitely like to lessen all the unnecessary pain that we'll have to go through. That being said, there's this other approach of maybe the universe didn't fuck up by making pain so big part of our experience, and also just seeing this correlation between pain and, you could call it just wisdom or some consciousness expansion. One way to see it is every time we're in pain, it's an opportunity to keep learning, growing, and deepening. It carves you out. It makes your container deeper. It can soften our heart. It can harden it or soften it and create a deep sense of empathy. You know, the people that I see that really, many of the times, do a lot to help other people and others in the world are people that experience deep pain themselves. And from this way of working on it, they want to go and alleviate pain. And so there's just to even break it down, like when we come into the world, birth is a very traumatic, painful experience. Towards the end of the life, when we're leaving, our body breaks down. It's very painful. I want to trust it's not by accident. You know, that we have a chance in every moment to really stay with our pain and embrace it with love, because it's going to happen. Or we can shut ourselves off and be in self-protection and fear for a long time and kind of really miss out on the reasons we're here.
Yeah. I really like that way of looking at it. Like that's just super like beautiful to say that. Again, I mean, I have a hard time disagreeing with you, because why would we have all this pain? Is it weren't for a reason? And I mean, if my psychedelic use, and not just psychedelics, but just my experience with just going deeper into myself, going inward into my soul, has been to come to the conclusion that everything truly does happen for a reason. Like there is a divine presence, and there's the ultimate consciousness of the universe happens in exactly the way that it's supposed to happen. So everything that happens goes the way that the universe intends. And so I have to believe that pain is there for a reason as well.
Yeah, that perspective helps me relax. And I can see people responding of like, what if there's this awful trauma within like genocides or rape? How can you say this was all meant to be? You know, and you can hold that, and in that perspective, there's a lot of pain being held. While in this other one, if we want to kind of surrender and relax, if it's all meant to happen, it at least brings more acceptance to the situation, which is a deep part of the grieving process. So from a pragmatic approach of what's more skillful way to move through the world, holding everything as meaningful and meant to be, I find it to be more effective and brings a deeper sense of peace for everybody, even if you're the one going through a hard time.
Yeah.
You know, this other part that kind of comes to mind that really is aligned to what we're sharing, I think we're here to love. I think that's why there's a universe and so on. And sometimes with my client work, what comes up a lot is the way we protect ourselves from loving, like in it, because I think this is like a microcosm of the larger way we can navigate with pain. We're so scared to love because we want to protect ourselves from getting hurt. But personally, what I've come to is every time I enter like a new romantic dynamic or there's some kind of attachment, just accept that it's going to be painful, and not in this pessimistic way, but pain's a deep part of love, you know?
Yeah.
So even if you're in love with somebody, if you're separated, say a month or two, like missing them is hard, you know, or you're going to get in fights, you're going to have misses. It's going to be painful at times, and that's okay. You know, best case situation is one of you dies. That's best case situation, and that's a lot of pain. So if you move to this place of constantly protecting yourself from pain, you've missed the entire reason we're alive. If you close off your heart to like loving, but if you just go ahead and accept it, it's going to be painful, and I'm going to love anyways. I think you're going to get the most out of this.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. I mean, I think if you can't fully embrace that pain, then there's no way that you can actually fully, truly embrace that love as well. And it's funny that you mentioned that. I wrote an article like on my blog, sort of like about the topic, about love being the most powerful force on earth for human beings, because I think every decision that we make is motivated by either chasing love or basically not wanting to feel pain, which is just the exact opposite of love. But like, I think every single decision that we make is actually truly motivated by that deep down.
I think so too. I mean, yeah, definitely. It seems so simplistic, but I find it to be true. Like the two emotional spectrums is fear, which is like avoidance of pain, right? Or loss or whatever, ultimately pain, or love. And every moment can be seen as that. Like every instance is a decision we're making in either one of those directions. And what I've seen, the more we make decisions out of fear, the more it just keeps creating fear. Mm-hmm. Right? The more we make decisions out of love, the more we keep creating and we keep feeling love. So it's so simplistic, and ultimately I see it as foundational and true so far.
Yeah. Well, Jahan, man, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and just having such a dope conversation. I'd love to have you on again at some point as you continue your work as well.
Brother.
I hope you enjoyed it.
I very much so, bro. It was really good to being here. Yeah, I also really enjoyed the conversation.
If you are still with me, thank you so much for listening to this episode. I hope that you enjoyed it. I hope that you learned something. I hope that this helps you with just something in your life, maybe, or maybe you just want like an hour of your life back. And if that's the case, I apologize. But if you do want to get in contact with Jahan, I'm going to link to all this shit in the footnotes. I'm going to link to his book as well. Check that out if you want to learn about psilocybin and psychedelics. And then also too, if you enjoyed this, please share it with a friend. Please follow the Instagram, follow it on whatever podcast platform you're on. Also, please like rate it if you wouldn't mind doing that, just because that helps me get in front of more people, which is something I'm trying to do. But at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter. And if this didn't vibe with you and you're just still here for whatever fucking reason, just turn it off and just don't listen again. So thank you everybody for sticking with me here. I'm excited to get to do this. I'm very blessed and grateful that this is something that I get to do in my life. And I appreciate each and every one of you for listening. So I will see you next time.